All right, so the next chapter in your book is the parent-child relationship. You say your child is a window to look through for the opposite sex, same energy parent to see who they were being at the moment of conception. The first thing to realize if you do not get an opposite energy child is what was going on that made that happen. What was their thinking at this time? What were their concerns? What were their fears? This is the opportunity to learn more about who they were being and why they did not get the opposite energy child.
Yeah, otherwise it's going to repeat itself. You get another, um, situation exactly the same. In other words, if you got a boy, you're a woman and you got a boy, you're going to get another boy unless you realize why you got the first one,
Mm-hmm.
and come to terms with that. So your child is really an opportunity for you to learn something about yourself.
Right.
We always think in terms of teaching our kids. The kids are teaching you just as much as you're teaching them.
Right.
So learn something, watch their behavior. Watch how they react to things, starting from the first time they came in they were given to you.
Mm-hmm.
There's some babies, for instance, are really hard to console. I mean, they're always upset.
Mm-hmm.
Some babies are very easy to deal with,
Yeah.
You can look at that in terms of, what was going on with the opposite sex parent. We've seen this.
Yeah, the one that comes to mind is Sena's boy, his wife. What was going on? Remember, he was in the Air Force, and they moved to some place on some Air Force base, and she was miserable, and she cried the whole time during her pregnancy, and she was just really in a bad way. And that little boy came out, and he was just miserable. He would never stop crying. I remember when we shared this with Sena, he could see it.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah,
so you can look at your child and realize what's going on with you. Now, if you don't understand this, like, for instance, with Perna, she has two boys, right? The first boy was clingy, hard to...
He was scared.
He's scared, frightened, no self-confidence. The second one had a lot of confidence in himself. And if you ask Perna her situation when she had her first one, and she explains to you that, I was in the country for the first time. I didn't know my job. I didn't know my husband. It was an arranged marriage. Everything was new to me, and I was scared. And then when she had the second one, she already had her job kind of under, she was doing good at the job. She loved her husband, understood her husband, felt supported by her husband, and she was used to the country. So it was kind of like a whole different ballgame for her in terms of her worldview. When she had her first one, she had her second one. Now the second one has all this confidence,
Yeah.
So if you take the first one and you start blaming him and saying, look, why don't you act like your older brother? I mean, your younger brother in this case. Why don't you act like your younger brother? I mean, you want the kid to act like the younger brother. The more you want him to change, the more he's going to be the way he is, and he's going to get angry about it.
Right.
So he's going to be more resistant to anything. But if you can grant being to him and say, well, that's the reason why he's that way, and that's the reason why that's the way it is. And eventually when they get a little older, you can explain it to them that, you're scared because I was scared. You see what I'm saying? That's the reason why you're scared. It's not because there's something wrong with you. It's just that's what was going on with me. And that's what's going on. And to the degree the kid can identify that in himself and say, yeah, I'm scared. I am scared about a lot of stuff. Is the degree he's not so scared anymore. The more he recognizes it, the more it's not there. So there's this tremendous opportunity for parents to understand, through their children what was going on with them more clearly, because they got a 3D thing going on here nonstop that explains it to them. You know what I mean? So it's like, this process of learning, and then at the same time you can educate your child to understand why he feels what he feels, because he has to understand that to be able to feel anything else.
Right.
And if you try to make him different than the way he is, and you try to deal with him like that, you're going to make him more and more like that. Less and less opportunity for him to grow and develop the more you want him to be different.
Right.
So this is critical in understanding where you're at as a parent, why you had the boy or why you had the girl. If you don't, then you have an imbalanced situation growing at the house. And when it's an imbalanced situation in the house, everybody does bad. Yeah. You want to explain that?
Well, yes, but I want to say this first. The idea that we inherit more than, the color of our eyes or the texture of our hair or, our height or anything from our parents without inheriting these things that make up who we are is really absurd to me, because it goes back to being individual in nature. If we think that we are all individual, It's like, okay, it's obvious that you inherited, the way your father looks because you look like him. But we're not that individual in nature. That's the thing. And that's, it's much more than looks that
it's a trap. The myth of the individual is a trap.
Right.
We're dual and opposite in nature. Until we understand that, we really can't go any further.
Right.
So, the best psychoanalysis doesn't make the difference. So you have to, understand this basic connection to life to be able to really see what's going on here.
Right.
It's like if you don't get the whole thing right, you don't have a starting point that, if you can't see the whole, if you can't start with the whole, like a balance of energy, if you can't start from there, then you can't understand the pieces.
Right.
If you start from something like pieces, you can't get to the whole. You know what I mean? So we started with everybody being separate individuals. We're trying to get to the whole understanding of things. Yeah. And we can't do that. Even in physics, you can't do that. So it's like we got to start with this and then work our way to everything else.
Right.
It's deductive reasoning. I mean, you got to start with something, but it's got to be something for real. Not just an idea or just not some sort of, philosophy or not some sort of, theory about something. And it can't be a belief system. You can't start with a belief system. It has to be something that's concrete in the sense that you can recognize it yourselves, you can feel it. So if you're in a family, for instance, talking about feeling it, that is an imbalance in energy, why don't you talk about growing up in your family where you was an imbalance in energy?
Right. It was very, very difficult. I mean, there was my mother who was expanding, my father who was contracting, and then 4 girls all contracting like my father. And, the family experience was always one of, like, there would be an explosion, right? And then after the explosion, everything settles down, right? Until the tension builds up again and until there's another explosion. And it was like that constantly. It was like one explosion, then everything dies down until the tension builds up again, and then there was another explosion. And that was my childhood. And my mother used to say to me, I was very close to her, and she would say to me, I can deal with you people one at a time, but whenever we get together as a family, I can't deal with it. She would be so stressed out and so uptight, and she was the only expanding energy. I mean, there was no room for her,
So what was it? How many contracting energy people?
5.
5 to 1.
To 1, yes.
So you walk in there, it would be like...
It was. We grew up on eggshells. I mean, because we never knew when the next explosion was coming, because of the tension. I grew up in a very tense household. Mm-hmm. Very, very tense. And I wasn't a happy child. Like, if I look back at pictures, like, it's always kind of surprises me because I consider myself, a relatively happy person. But when I was a child, when I look at the pictures, I was not happy. I was not a happy child.
Right.
So
to the degree the parent can own why they get that opposite sex child at conception, like, is the degree that they understand where they're at, right? If they get that opposite sex child and don't understand this, they're much more likely to create more imbalance in the family. Mm-hmm. So if your father could understand from the beginning why, like we just said, the daughter was the first child and could own it, and really own it, that I am a control freak. Mm-hmm. I mean, to own it, you know what I mean? The chances of having that continue on and continue on and continue on with that worldview that he has embedded in each child, mm-hmm. in such a way that they're struggling with that world that they create out of that worldview. You know what I mean? This changes their lives. Yeah. When you can understand why you get that, why I got a daughter first, mm-hmm. it changes my life, it changes her life, and it changes the life of any offspring that are coming.
Right.
Because my way of looking at the world will change, and that will affect everything else. And
and I know it was heartbreak for my father that he never had a son. I remember when my younger sister was born, because, you know, Lori, Nancy, and I were 3 years apart, and then Susie came 8 years later. And he came into my room and he was crying and told me that I had a baby sister. But he was crying, and I'm 8 years old. You know, it's like I couldn't understand, like, why would he be crying? You know, now I understand it. But, you know, he was trapped by not knowing what he inherited.
That's right.
You know, because, you know, we all want, you know, to be happy. We all want, you know, we all want our lives to work. And you know, I know, you know, he was in reaction to his mother. You know, when I asked, because I didn't know his mother. She died 9 months before I was born. So my mother she told me, you know, she was a very difficult woman. You know, everything had to be her way. You know, and he resented that. He resented that she ran the show, because to my father, you know, his father should run the show because the man should run the show. You know, I mean, all this stuff that's going on from one generation.
Well, you said the worldview of your oldest sister was determined by the first situation.
Lori was never a happy person. I mean, really, I remember her in high school. I mean, she was miserable in high school, and she didn't like the nuns. She was in Catholic school, and, you know, and I know that when my parents got married, they had to live with his parents. So I'm sure my father wasn't happy about that, you know. And
he said that, right?
Yeah, he wasn't happy, and Lori wasn't happy. You know, Lori always struggled, you know.
And she ran away from Atlanta. She said it to me.
Yeah.
I couldn't be in Atlanta with them. I had to get away.
Mm-hmm. And then, you know,
the situation was, again, first child born.
Mm-hmm.
Your parents were living with his parents.
Right.
In a tough situation because they didn't have the money to move off on their own, and she was the demanding person, his mother. Mm-hmm. So under her thumb, they were living.
Right.
And he was, you know, upset about the whole situation. Mm-hmm. And your mother even talked about how she couldn't even use the washing machine or something. What was going on with that?
Yeah, I mean, she was just difficult. You know, his mother was just difficult. But the other thing was, you know, his mother had 3 sisters, no boys.
Right.
So her father was difficult to deal with.
Yes.
And I don't remember like what his profession was exactly. I might have gotten all that wrong, but, you know, but I just know she came from 3 sisters. And as a result, because she had lost her first child, and then it was told she could not have another child, and then she got pregnant with my father, you know, she was very overprotective of him and overbearing. And so he had a whole conversation about women that came out of that, you know. So, I mean, it's just, people are complex, you know, and they get passed down things that they're completely unaware of, which is exactly what we're talking about here. But you had mentioned about growing up in an imbalanced situation, and I told you it was not a good situation.
Okay, so I want to talk about this.
Okay.
As far as another example of working with a family and understanding their situation with their children. I had a husband and wife that I knew pretty well come to talk to me about their second daughter. They had a lot of problems with her. Her attitude was negative, and she created a lot of trouble with her older sister. And they were afraid that they'd lose her. You know, she's into this country from another country, and they were bringing her up here, but she was acting real independent, and she wouldn't listen to anybody, and she's just basically obstinate. And they thought that they were going to lose her. So I said, well, what was going on? You know what I mean, when you had your daughters? And the husband and wife were talking about it. And the first daughter was no problem at all dealing with her. She's friendly and easy to deal with. The second one was very hard to deal with. So that's the one they were concerned about. So I said, well, what was going on with the husband, you know, when you had your second daughter? And he didn't have a chance to get the words out of his mouth because his wife said, you know what was going on.
Well, he was expanding and didn't remember well, but she remembered everything.
Yeah, but, you know, she was right on him about it. You know, she said, look, you're fighting with your mother and your brothers over money. Your father had died, the estate was up in the air, and everybody's blaming you for something. You know, and it was just a nightmare for you. You were angrier than I've ever seen her in your life. Mm-hmm. And then when the girl was born, I mean, she had all kinds of problems with her skin, and she's been upset and angry the whole time. If you bought something for the older one, she'd resent it. Mm-hmm. whatever it was, you know. If it was a dress, it was the wrong color, you know what I mean? It should have been the other color. If she gave her, you know,
Right.
they're arguing about dress colors. So it's kind of like, no matter what it was, she couldn't be consoled. She was always pissed off about something. So I said to him, look, why don't you just get this younger daughter together with you guys, and of course they're blaming her for acting like that, and they're telling, why don't you act like your sister? The usual story, you know.
Well, I remember the mother saying, the mother told me that her husband told her if anything ever happened to him, don't ever trust the second daughter. That's what he told the mother.
So I said to him, look, okay, so here's what you need to do. You need to both sit down with your daughter's present, all right? And I want you, the father, to apologize to her for blaming her for acting the way she's been acting her whole life. And then, you know, and then see what happens, all right? And then, of course, explain, you know, what was going on with you, and see what happens. So they got together and they sat down in their living room, and he did that. He told her, I'm sorry for blaming you for acting the way you're acting. Because, you know, at the time you were conceived, I was the one that was angry, resentful, you know, about what was going on with me. And nothing could please me. Nothing could console me. You know, it's like I was just always upset. And I've been blaming you for being like that. And I want to apologize for doing that, because that was something that you know, that came from me into you at conception. And the girl started crying when he said that. And she said, you know, Daddy, you don't have to apologize to me for that. But I always wanted to know I was upside down. That's exactly what she said.
Yeah.
In that moment of realization of why she was the way she was not that way anymore. The parents told me that it was like 30 minutes that it took place. She left that conversation like a whole different person. She said the resentment that she had for her older sister and whatever was going on turned exactly 180 degrees, where they were close, they would talk and everything else. Just exactly the opposite of who she was being before, simply because she understood why she was that way. Mm-hmm. And when you can recognize it, it's not there anymore. So you can imagine how easy it is to handle these situations and these families with these angry boys and girls if you can just understand where it's all coming from and explain it to them. It's transformational for everybody involved. Mm-hmm. Took 30 minutes.
Right. Well, I know, you know, with the girl that we work with in food production, she was always afraid of everything. And after, you know, learning some of these things that we're talking about, she went to her father and asked, what was going on for you that makes me afraid of everything? And he told her that in his country, you know, the government was after him for some reason, so he was in hiding. And the mother he used to sneak to see the mother, and the mother got pregnant with her. And when she realized that the reason she was afraid of everything was because of the fear that was in him, that if he were to be, you know, found by the government, that they would kill him, you know, he was afraid of everything. And once she realized that, she changed. And all of her friends, you know, many of which work with her today, will tell you that she's a different person. Right. Once she actually realized it. So
when she had two boys, the same sort of situation.
Yeah, she had two boys.
And the first one, she didn't understand this, and the second time she did. The second one she did.
The second one was just, yeah.
The first boy is, again, very, you know, frightened and all that.
Unsure of himself.
So it's father to daughter to her sons. Mm-hmm. This worldview was passed on.
That's right.
And the oldest one was like that until she recognized it in herself. Then the second one's got all this confidence. He's easy to deal with. Everybody loves him. Yeah. He's like the angel, you know what I mean, in terms of everybody's child.
Yeah, and after that, then she got pregnant again and had the girl.
Right.
You know.
She finally got to that point where she could have the girl.
Right.
So these are exciting stories, you know, in people's lives that you can see what we're talking about through. And the opportunity is, of course, you take a look at your own lives.
Yeah, and in your book you wrote, bottom line, having a child is a learning experience for all involved. It reinforces every decision we make when we see the programming that is running our minds, you know, until we can see it and know it. And
yeah, our worldview reinforces every decision we make. It's an unconscious reinforcing. It's just, but it's kind of like this. it's like every decision we make reinforces our worldview.
Yeah.
So we're right about the way we see the world.
Right.
That's what it's all about. And that's what we're doing here. We're trying to understand what is our worldview, what is where we're coming from, and how does it affect us. And your children are the window to look through to be able to see the truth about who you're being.
Yeah, it's like it's a gift. Your children are a gift.
The gift, yeah, to see where you're at in your life. And when you can recognize it, they're free and you're free.
Right.
You know, that's what we're talking about here. Real freedom.